Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, 2025, and today we're going to talk about our high tunnel tomato trellising system. We're going to talk about if you can't rotate your crops, can you throw a cover crop in there to kind of break it up a little bit, and what's trending in the market gardening world right now. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Monday, everyone. I hope your weekends were lovely. Ours was wet, like very wet. It basically rained every minute of the entire weekend, especially those minutes when we were playing soccer / coaching soccer. Definitely among the wettest, if not just the straight up, the wettest spring I've been through. Interestingly, though, I did learn that it rains on almost 50% of Derby days, like 48%. That's interesting. Anyway, last week I went ahead and trellised our grafted tunnel tomatoes. So let's talk a bit today about how we trellis the tomatoes that are in our high tunnel. Technically, this is something you could do outside with a tall enough trellis wire, but we do it in our high tunnel and generally reserve the Florida weave for the field. That is basically using a string to hold tomatoes up, which I will discuss another time. Anyway, I did a whole tomato trellising video at one point on which options are out there, and I will link that in the show notes if you're interested. But the system we've been using for the last few years is called the QLIPR system, QLIPR. And what it is an elongated metal hook that you hang above the vines. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can kind of see what this looks like. So I hang the hook above each of the tomato vines on either side because I'm going to train these tomatoes to what's called a double leader, meaning instead of one main branch, there will be two branches. I do this to maximize all the expense and time spent on grafting and to better utilize the tunnel space. I usually am interplanting, though. I did not notably do that this year, just because I didn't have the time. Anyway, I place a hook on either side of the plant, and each hook will hold up its own branch from each tomato plant. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I trim out all the extra branches, but I leave the very bottom sucker, which is kind of the branch that comes out in between the main stem and the leaf, the first leaf. So I leave that one to be my second main branch. So yeah, again, I place a hook on either side of the plant and each hook will hold up its own branch. However, there is a time before the plant reaches the hooks, which are notably 72 inches long, so not long enough to reach the ground where the tomato plants are hanging out. But especially since they are grafted tomatoes, I cannot have the top part, the scion, rooting into the ground, so it can't lay on the ground. I have to keep them up off the ground somehow. So what I do is I tie a string from the trellis to the plant on each side. The string will help me to guide the tomato up to the steel hook. I'll just have to wind the plant around the string as it grows until it gets up there. Then once it's up there at the metal hook, I will switch to the QLIPR clips, which are metal clips with like foam in the middle that are not my favorite thing, if I'm being honest. They're not the most functional, but basically they squeeze the tomato plant and then hook onto the actual metal rod, and that holds the whole tomato plant up, and you just need like 2 of them per plant, which is nice because other systems use like dozens of those little plastic clips, which are, you know, not the most environmentally friendly thing. Then anyway, once the tomato has reached the metal part, then you can just kind of clip that string off and just use 2 clips for the rest of the season. When the tomato plant gets to the top of the trellis, you take the bottom clip off, move the plant down physically, like just kind of scoot it down, keeping the top clip on. Then you reclip the new growth back like a sort of bizarre horticultural leapfrog. Then you move the hook down the line and basically lower and lean the plant down, conveniently called the lower and lean system. So you literally take the giant hook off and you move it down a few inches or a few feet, depending on how tall the plant is, and then you set it back on the wire, and the plant ultimately just ends up leaning over. This is how you get high tunnel tomatoes that produce until, you know, like the late fall and are like 30 feet long. Now, pruning them to make sure they don't become a mess is another story, and we'll talk about that when we really start getting into that in June. But yeah, feeling good having our tomato plants up off the ground now and ready to begin their long climb to deliciousness. Now, if we have some wild cold snap come through, not likely, at least not looking at the radar, but not impossible, I would have to take all the hooks off and throw some row cover over top of the tomatoes. That would not be ideal, but all I see in the forecast is a few nights in the 40s, which probably means we're good to go. So no late frost this year, game on. Anyway, questions or thoughts on that system? Did it make sense? I mean, if you're listening on a podcast, it may be harder than if you were just watching it on YouTube, but let me know. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, can you plant the same crop in the same place if you use a cover crop between them? BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise.
Still using QuickBooks for your farm's bookkeeping? You're wasting time and losing money. Farm finances can be overwhelming, but they don't have to be. Farm Raised Tracks is the all-in-one tool built just for farmers. Manage expenses, prep for taxes, run payroll, and plan for the future without spreadsheets or stress. Just clear, organized insights to keep your operation thriving. Thousands of farmers trust Tracks to make smart financial decisions all year long. It's time you did too. Use code NOTIL20, that's all caps, no spaces, NOTIL20 for 20% off the life of your membership at farmraise.com. All right, back to the show.
If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Bill Marshall, who writes, quote, Farmer Jesse, in at least one of your videos, you address crop rotation, mentioning several academic studies that examined the effects of specific rotations and the efficacy of them. My questions regard cover crops in relation to planting a subsequent crop intended for harvest. A specific example, I planted potatoes in a few beds in spring 2024. The 2025 plan is to transplant another nightshade, in my case tomatoes, into last year's potato beds. However, after I removed the potatoes last summer, I added my homemade compost to the beds, and presently I planted a diverse cover crop blend of at least 6 species, turnip, mustard, oats, a few others. Those cover crops mostly winter killed. Does that intervening cover crop reduce any risks to the tomatoes? If so, which ones? How should we think of cover crops in terms of crop rotation? Thanks to you and your teams for what you do. End quote. All right, Bill, fun questions here. Thank you. So indeed, I've talked before about crop rotations and how effectively, especially people on a small scale, are like, is it really that necessary? I'll post a link to the video I did on the subject, but the general answer is that sometimes it will work fine to plant the same crop family in the same place multiple years in a row. You may even occasionally see a boost in production, but ultimately the risk is not worth the reward. Oftentimes, even if a plant is healthy, studies show they can still harbor pathogenic organisms that could get out of hand the next year or at least eventually. So generally, yes, rotate. However, Bill's question here is more or less, what if I threw a cover crop in between those two crops in the same family? Would that change anything? Does it add an interesting twist? So I gave the research a look just to see what I could find that might be helpful. There is not a lot that gives me a clear answer to your specific situation here. Obviously, continuous cropping on things like corn and soybeans and cotton is relatively common practice, and using a cover crop to break up that rotation does have some positive research behind it, but those are often still using herbicides and chemical fertilizers, plus they are not nightshades, so not entirely helpful. There's also some evidence that planting biofumigating cover crops like your mustard is at least beneficial in terms of soil health in a continuous tomato system in a high tunnel, which again is not exactly the same thing. So I can't say for sure based on the research that I could find, but what I can say is that if it were me in that situation and I had to put the tomatoes back where I had the potatoes, that mix of cover crops, in particular the turnip, mustard, oats, looks like a good one to me. I would also generally like to add at least one, if not two, if that's not part of your few others thing, legumes. Indeed, I like at least small crop rotations just for insurance sake. If I'm going into the same place with the same crop family and I had the time and space for a crop in between those, a cover crop as opposed to a cash crop would be, to me, a better form of insurance, just to make sure that soil is as healthy and ready to go as possible. Cover crops, as we have talked about many, many times before, and we'll do so many more times in the future, can do so much good in terms of adding microbiology to the soil and microbial biomass and making nutrients available and retaining water and keeping the soil in place and building soil organic matter and just so much more. My general take on crop rotation is that you can indeed get away with not rotating every single crop every single time, but only for so long in the same place. Eventually the equilibrium, did I say that word right? Equilibrium will tip and the conditions will be right for a pathogen to proliferate and infect a crop, which is not ideal, but cover crops will at least potentially help stave that off for a while. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and definitely watch that Are Crop Rotations Necessary video if you all are interested in this, because there is a lot of nuance to the subject for sure. Not all crop rotations are created equal, which is very fascinating and very confusing. Otherwise, I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what's trending in the veggie world right now. Be right back.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is also brought to you by Ring of Fire. What if you could turn your brush problem into black gold? The Ring of Fire biochar kiln is your spring tool for soil transformation, converting woody debris into high-quality biochar in just hours. Biochar will kickstart your compost, retain water and nutrients in your soil, and provide habitat for beneficial microbes. Now $19.95 with flat rate shipping. Their spring sale runs through June. Don't wait to boost your soil and optimize your inputs. Visit ringoffire.earth/growers now to learn more. Also, for more information on biochar, check out the No Till Market Garden podcast interview with Kelpie Wilson, inventor of the Ring of Fire kiln, that we will link in the show notes. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. I started a CSA to grow food and build community, not to drown in admin work. Spreadsheets, emails, and pack lists take up too much time. If I could spend less time at my desk and more in the field, that'd be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand automates billing, newsletters, websites, and member support, saving CSA farmers 20 plus hours a week. Focus on farming, not paperwork. See how Farmhand can help. Book a one-on-one demo with founder Ari at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so analytics are a thing available to most content creators, and having been at this for a long time, I can look and see what of our work at any given time is trending based on the time of year. So I thought I would try an occasional segment that looks at what is trending at a specific time of year and what that tells us about gardening, about the market gardening world, the world in general. Who knows? Or maybe it doesn't tell us anything at all. I guess we'll find out. Now, this is my first iteration of this idea, maybe also my last. We'll see what you all think. But I thought I'd start by looking in terms of trends at which of the many hundreds of videos we've done, which of those are getting the most interest right now. In other words, what are people clicking on, which tells us a bit about what people are searching for or thinking about, like a small glimpse into the collective psyche around small farming, or just a glimpse into what the YouTube algorithm is pushing. Or both. First, if you look at our most popular videos in no-till growers history, there are a few of those that in the last 7 days or so are getting a lot of the same attention that they always do because they address general topics like how to start a farm. But there are also a few that are getting attention now that don't generally get it throughout the season. So, for instance, one video that has been trending over the last 7 days that is not on the top 10 of all time is a video about what to expect when planting directly into compost, like deep compost mulches. I think this is interesting because as little as 5 or 6 years ago, this was not at all that big of a trend. It's definitely not the trend that it has become to use a thick layer of compost as a sort of a growing medium, all of the no dig or deep compost mulching systems. So to me, that suggests that a lot of people are considering this or thinking about it or coming up with it organically or whatever, watching videos on, no dig and that sort of stuff. Another video that is in the top 10, if you remove the recent uploads of Growers Daily, which skew the results a bit, certainly, is the video I actually mentioned at the top about tomato trellising. This makes sense to me because as people are planting tomatoes or are about to, trellises are on the brain. In thinking about this, I think of that video that my buddy Josh Satin made several years ago called Trellis to Make You Jealous, which is inarguably one of the best video titles of all time and currently has like 3.7 million views. And I'm sure it is also likewise blowing up again at the moment, as again, people are probably wondering how to keep their tomatoes off the ground once they plant them. Now, I should say that our top 3 or 4 videos in a month are always the same. Number one is almost always how to start a small farm, followed by how the pros start gardens, about how to go from pasture into production. Then the mulch breakdown video that we did or the soil amending simplified video. This seems like a reasonable group to me, how to break into soil, how to break into the market garden business, how to keep both of those things going. It makes sense that a lot of people would have a lot of questions about those things in particular, and that content would garner a lot of interest. That soil amending simplified video has always had a lot of interest, and I think a big part of that, or something I gleaned from that, is that soil amending is one of those confounding subjects that is indeed hard to understand and needs simplifying. Even in the comments of that video, though, people are basically like, Jesse, this is still not simple enough. That to me is a perennial challenge for my work, how to make soil management something that anyone can understand, because soil is so dynamic
that's a really hard topic to tackle in a general way. This is why I'm always deferring more to compost than specific rock minerals or anything like that, because compost is one of the few amendments that is more or less universally okay to put on most soil within reason. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm seeing. I hope that was at least a little bit interesting or helpful or both. I definitely think it's interesting to see what people are thinking about, and sometimes that guides what we make, and sometimes it makes me wonder what else people have questions about that we haven't covered and need covering. So let us know. What videos or podcasts are you not finding? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up there for this Monday. Don't forget, we are here at No Till Growers officially a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers for their support as well. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook at a seed farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of May, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to, who we got? Kate Maudsley. Kate Maudsley. That's a good name. Shouts to Kate for getting a story started this week. This makes me think this story has to take place in like somewhere in rural England, maybe farming the hillsides there in like North Yorkshire, hanging out with like James Herriot. You know, he would stop by and check, you know, on Kate's sheep and would hang out and, you know, talk about veterinarian stuff. But anyway, this was all like back in the 1950s and it's like post-war, so and all that. So things are starting to recover. There's a little bit of hope in the air. But one day while Kate is out tending the sheep, there's this, you know, Kate is up on this hillside and there's this giant flash that comes across the sky, right? Like just blinding flash, lightning, loud, all this stuff. And it came out of nowhere. There was no sky. There was no, you know, real clouds in the sky. And Kate notices, like after a second of being blind, when Kate's vision kind of returns, Kate notices there are a group of people standing in Kate's garden with like weird objects in their hand, and they're kind of talking frantically, and Kate has no idea what's going on. And that's where this week's story begins. Anyway, we'll return to it on Tuesday. That's tomorrow. That will be the 6th of Tuesday, which isn't quite as exciting as the 5th. I bet for somebody. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow. Bye. My morning cocktail. It's orange juice and watermelon and water. Lots of water. Got some farming to do later. You don't have to wait anymore. You're holding on to feelings, let them pour out on me.
Time is precious, and so are our pets. So time with our pets is extra precious. That's why we started Dutch. Dutch provides 24/7 access to licensed vets with unlimited virtual visits and follow-ups for up to 5 pets. You can message a vet at any time and schedule a video visit the same day. Our vets can even prescribe medication for many ailments, and shipping is always free. With Dutch, you'll get more time with your pets and year-round peace of mind when it comes to their vet care.